The morning light over Harbor Point moved gently across the water. But inside the small seaside diner, Evan Carter paused as if the world had stopped breathing for a moment. He stood behind the counter with one hand resting on a steel prep table, eyes fixed on a faint reflection in its surface. To anyone watching, it looked like a man thinking about breakfast. But the stillness in his shoulders said something else. Something older. He let out a quiet breath and reached for the knife. His grip was steady in a way that didn't match the calm life he lived now. The blade tapped softly on the cutting board. Onions, peppers, a handful of herbs, every movement precise, every angle correct. His hands did not move like the hands of a chef. They moved like the hands of someone trained to count seconds under fire. A fishing boat rumbled past the window. Evan turned his head slightly, watching its silhouette drift by. Just a glance, but he held it long enough to map the space outside. The angles, the exits, the blind corners near the docks. It was a habit he never managed to kill. No matter how many breakfasts he cooked or how many slow days settled over Harbor Point. The first customer of the morning walked in, greeting him with a cheerful wave. Evan answered with a smile that came easily. But before stepping toward the grill, he scanned the room in a slow, practiced sweep. Ceiling beams, back door, narrow window near the pantry. Everything exactly where it should be. Everything safe. Safe. The word meant something different to him than it did to the people who ate here. Hours before dawn, he had heard a sound outside the diner. Small, sharp, like metal tapping against brick. He had stepped out with a flashlight, expecting raccoons or a loose piece of gutter. But the alley had been empty. Too empty. Even the usual gulls had kept their distance, circling farther out over the water. He told himself not to think about it, not to fall back into old patterns, not to run scenarios. But as the morning crowd drifted in, he could still feel the echo of that sound in his spine. The way a scar feels before rain. He plated an omelet, set it down for the customer, and wiped the counter clean. His reflection stared back at him, short-cropped dark hair, a few days of beard, and eyes that tried to look peaceful but never stayed that way for long. People said he had the calm of someone who had survived storms. Evan knew the truth was simpler. He had walked out of too many places no one else walked out of. A gust of wind pressed against the front windows. The door chime rattled. Evan froze for half a heartbeat. Something outside had shifted. Not loudly, not dangerously, just enough. He reached for the towel on his shoulder and folded it once, buying himself a second to listen. It came again. That same faint metallic click from before dawn. And this time, it was closer. The passenger shuttle glided through the morning haze as it descended toward the edge of Harbor Point. To everyone inside, it was nothing more than a commuter drop-off, workers heading to the docks. Tourists with cameras ready, a few students half asleep. Only one passenger sat without moving, her eyes fixed not on the scenery but on the faint blue projection reflected across her wrist. Orizia Vale kept her posture relaxed, her hands folded loosely on her lap. She looked human enough, dark jacket, jeans, hair tied back, no uniform, no insignia, nothing that hinted she belonged anywhere except here. But under her sleeve, the projection pulsed once, an encrypted alert, and she tilted her wrist slightly to read it. Signal instability detected. Possible trace of Helion core unit. Probability 72%. She breathed out through her nose, slow and steady, the way she'd trained for years. The core unit was close. Too close. Closer than any previous sweep had ever suggested. The shuttle touched the pavement with a soft thrum. Doors slid open. People filed out, chattering about tides, work schedules, morning coffee. Orizia stepped into the flow like a shadow slipping between shadows. She turned her collar up against the breeze. It wasn't the cold she minded. It was the way the air here felt too clean, too quiet, too unmonitored. Earth hasn't been placed on any interstellar map. There are no treaties. There is no official jurisdiction. If anyone on this planet discovered what she really was, or what had followed her here, the consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. She checked the reflection in a shop window. Her appearance held steady. Her pulse did not. Under her jacket, her compact scanner vibrated once, a brief tremor. No more than a warning. Kravosk had been here within the last few hours. His energy trail had degraded. But it was unmistakable. He hadn't learned subtlety in all the years she'd hunted him. Orizia walked past a street vendor selling coffee. The smell surprised her. Human beverages often did, sharp, warm, strangely nostalgic despite belonging to a world she had never grown up in. The vendor offered her a cup with a friendly nod. She smiled politely, declined, and kept moving. She couldn't risk staying visible longer than necessary. Her steps carried her toward the piers. The data from her wrist projection overlaid itself faintly across her vision, map grids. Probabilities. Estimated movement patterns. Kravosk's symbol blinked like a slow heartbeat. Each pulse meant he was closer than she had ever dared hope. And closer than she was comfortable with. She turned into a narrow street lined with small shops. Sunlight hit the windows, scattering the reflections across the pavement. At the far end of the block, she saw a small diner. Lights already on, someone moving inside with purposeful calm. Then her scanner pulsed again. Helion core energy, 68 meters. Direction, forward left. Orizia stopped walking. Forward left was the diner. She tightened her grip on her jacket sleeve, concealing the device beneath. Whatever she was about to find in that diner was no coincidence. And it would not wait for her to be ready. The bell above the diner door gave a soft chime as Orizia Vale stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. Not physical warmth, but the kind that lived in places built by human hands, coffee brewing. Metal pans heating, sunlight folding across wooden floors. For a moment, she just stood there, letting her eyes adjust from the glare outside. Evan Carter glanced up from behind the counter. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Just a slight narrowing of the eyes. He had seen everyone who lived in Harbor Point, and he had never seen her. Orizia scanned the room without turning her head. 3 tables, 1 exit at the back. Windows wide enough to vault through if needed. No immediate threats, but her scanner, hidden beneath her sleeve, flickered softly. Kravosk's trail was still active. Still close. She chose a booth near the window. Angled so she could watch the door and the kitchen at the same time. Evan approached with a notepad. Though he didn't need one. His gaze measured her the way she measured him, quietly. Carefully. "What can I get you this morning?" he asked. Orizia hesitated. She had read about human cuisine in briefings. But she had never eaten any. Her assignment didn't usually allow time for experiments. "Something simple," she said. "Something you recommend." Evan nodded once. Not the nod of a salesman, but of someone who had already decided what she needed. He stepped back into the kitchen. For a few seconds, the only sounds were the low hiss of butter hitting a hot pan and the faint scrape of a spatula. Orizia felt something strange then. A scent, warm proteins, caramelized sugars, aromatic compounds separating and recombining in the air. Human cooking followed chemical principles she understood. But the sensory effect was unexpected, comforting, disarming. When Evan placed the plate in front of her, the heat rose gently, carrying subtle layers she couldn't immediately parse. Texture variance, balanced salt distribution, perfect thermal gradients. She took the first bite because she needed calories. She took the second because she needed answers. "How did you prepare this?" she asked quietly. Evan raised an eyebrow. "Same way I prepare everything. Patience and heat." She studied him. Her fork paused midair. "Your technique is unusually precise." He gave a small shrug. As if precision was the only way he knew how to breathe. Old habits. She wanted to ask what kind of old habits required knife control that clean. Reflexes that sharp. Or eyes that tracked every movement in the room. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she said, "It's good." Evan's smile was faint, but real. Glad to hear it. For a few moments, they existed in an odd, quiet equilibrium, her trying to blend in. Him trying to understand why someone who moved like a thread chose a seat in his diner. The morning crowd hadn't arrived yet. Just the two of them, separated by a table and an entire species. Orizia finished half the meal. More than she expected. It settled her breathing, slowed her pulse, almost made her forget. The device under her sleeve vibrated once. A sharp pulse. Stronger. Closer. She looked up. Evan was already watching her. Sensing the shift in her posture before she even moved. Something outside the window cast a brief shadow across the glass. Whatever peace this diner held was about to end. The vibration under Arizia's sleeve didn't stop this time. It pulsed again, harder, sharper, urgent. She straightened in the booth. Her breathing slowed, every sense narrowed. Evan saw it instantly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Before she could answer, the front window caught a distorted reflection, a figure stepping out of a dark SUV. Then another behind him, then a third, not locals, too coordinated, too quiet, and their jackets were weighted at the sides in a way civilians never carried. Arizia whispered one word under her breath. "Mercenaries." The diner's bell never had a chance to ring. The door slammed inward, hitting the wall with a violent crack as two men pushed in. Weapons low but ready. A third stepped behind them to block the exit. Their faces were blank, professional, detached. The first man spotted Arizia and spoke into a throat mic. "Target confirmed." She slid out of the booth, reaching for her jacket pocket. But Evan knew before she did that she wouldn't get there in time. The second mercenary raised his weapon. Evan moved first. Not fast, not panicked, just decisive. He grabbed the steel serving tray from the counter and hurled it like a discus across the room. It struck the man's wrist with a metallic snap, knocking his aim off just enough that the round buried itself harmlessly into the ceiling. The mercenary cursed and corrected his stance. Arizia dove behind an overturned chair. Evan didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the counter with the same fluid momentum of someone who had done it under fire before. He reached the spilled silverware, snatched the longest knife, and gripped it reversed along his forearm. The first mercenary charged toward him. Evan stepped inside the swing, locked the man's elbow, and drove him into the corner with sheer body weight. The man hit the floor, hard. The second mercenary fired again. The bullet tore through a coffee pot, exploding glass and hot liquid across the counter. Arizia reached her pocket at last and yanked out a compact baton. One click. A thin pulse of blue light rippled along its edge. Not a plasma blade, not anything exotic, just a close-range charge rod, legal on half the planets she'd worked on. But on Earth, she could only run it at a fraction of its power. She lunged at the third mercenary. Her baton connected with his forearm, sending a jolt that forced his fingers open. His gun clattered to the floor. He swung his other fist. She ducked, but not fast enough. His knuckles grazed her cheek. Evan saw the moment she faltered. He grabbed a metal coffee canister and hurled it with brutal accuracy. It slammed into the mercenary's temple. The man staggered, dazed. Arizia finished him with a sharp kick to the ribs. But the fight wasn't over. The first mercenary, bleeding from the lip, pulled a small beacon from his belt and snapped it open. A tracker ping. A signal sent. Evan recognized the sound instantly. "More are coming," he said. Arizia's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths. "We need to move, now." Evan wiped blood from his eyebrow with the back of his hand, grabbed a jacket from the hook on the wall, and motioned to the rear exit. He didn't ask who these men were. He didn't ask why they wanted her dead. He only asked one thing as they ran for the back door. "Are they coming for you, or coming for us?" Arizia didn't answer. She didn't have to. The echo of the tracker ping was answer enough. The warehouse sat at the edge of the old industrial district, half abandoned, half alive with quiet power sources hidden behind rusted walls. Inside, Kravosk Ren worked alone under a single strip of white light that hummed with a metallic tremor. The illumination cut a sharp line across his scarred features, revealing the kind of face built from long years of engineering work and longer years of running. He sat hunched over a compact device the size of a handheld radio. Its internal core glowed with faint pulsing threads of silver and blue, each pulse reflecting off the metal rings embedded along his left temple. He adjusted the housing with deliberate precision, every movement practiced. This was the Helion core unit. Not a weapon. Not a relic. A stolen piece of navigation architecture from the Lyrid Technica Consortium, meant to synchronize military fleets across light hours without delay. Highly encrypted, strictly controlled, illegal beyond measure. It was also the reason Kravosk lived like a ghost. He wiped dust from the casing and opened a diagnostic panel. The numbers flickered. Stabilization at 84%. Not enough. He exhaled slowly, the sound dry and controlled, then reached for a soldering pen and a set of micro-alignment rods. As he worked, he spoke softly in his native Lyrian tongue, the cadence low and measured, as if the machine were listening. Just a little longer, then we sell you, and I disappear. On the nearby table, a portable monitor lit up with an alert. Motion detected. Inbound footage flagged. He tapped the screen, expecting the usual street-level noise. Instead, a grainy video filled the display. A diner. 3 mercenaries. A woman he recognized immediately. Orizia Vale. Kravosk's jaw tightened. She had tracked him across 2 systems before he slipped free on a stolen transport. He had assumed she was still chasing shadow trails somewhere in the outer colonies. But there she was, on Earth, sitting in a diner booth, eating soup. And then he saw the man. Tall, steady hands, moving with the restraint of someone trained never to waste emotion. The way he launched a metal tray. The way he stepped into a strike. The way he handled close-range combat. There was discipline there, muscle memory, experience. Kravosk watched every frame twice. "What are you?" he muttered. "A soldier, or something else?" He rewound again, this time zooming on Evan's eyes. No hesitation, no confusion. A man who had buried his past, only for it to surface the moment violence walked through his door. A variable. A complication. A witness. Kravosk reached for a slate of encrypted notes. He added a new line under the target list. Earth-born male, combat trained, interfered with initial retrieval attempt. Status: eliminate or neutralize. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The presence of Orizia Vale was already a serious threat. But a local actor capable of interfering? That was unacceptable. Too many paths for risk. Too many ways this quiet planet could become a stage for something far more dangerous. He turned off the footage and stood, his silhouette stretching long against the metal wall. "This changes everything," he whispered. The Helion core throbbed once inside its casing, as if answering him. Outside the warehouse, a cold wind pushed dust across the empty loading yard while Kravosk prepared for the next step. Orizia was no longer his only problem. Now there was Evan Carter. And Evan Carter needed to be removed. Evan had cleaned blood off his hands before, but never in a sink behind his own restaurant. The cold water ran pink for a moment, then cleared. He let it splash across his face, trying to steady his breath. Outside, sirens echoed faintly from the far end of Harbor Point, but none of them were coming this way. Not yet. Orizia stood near the rear door, scanning through a small wrist module she had reactivated on low power. Its display projected a narrow column of data into the dim storage room. She didn't look up when she said, "You need to see this." Evan dried his hands and stepped closer. Lines of symbols scrolled across the projection. Some looked like text, some looked like coordinates, some were patterns he couldn't interpret at all. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A market post," Orizia said, "encrypted, distributed across the black circuit. It's how off-world criminal groups trade information without using formal networks." "And this is about you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she tapped one section of the projection. The symbols rewrote themselves into English letters through a translation layer. Target update. Earth-born male. Combat trained. Interference confirmed. Threat level. Variable. Status. Remove. The word remove pulsed once, in a dull red hue. Evan stared at it. He felt something cold settle behind his ribs, not fear, but the weight of understanding. They put this out already? That fast? Kravosk wastes no time, Orizia said. He learned who you are. That makes you a liability. I'm not even part of this, Evan said quietly. You are now. She adjusted the wrist module, widening the field of projected data. Multiple nodes branched outward into a network map, thin lines connecting dozens of distant points. These are the ones who received the alert, she said. Some are mercenary groups, some are acquisition crews, some are independent hunters. All of them will be looking for you. Evan let out a long breath. Because I threw a tray at the wrong guy. Because you stop trained killers with instinct. Orizia corrected him. Kravosk assumes anyone capable of that might interfere again. Evan leaned back against a metal shelf, running a hand through his hair. His heartbeat felt too loud. His restaurant, his kitchen, his routine, everything that had finally made sense after the military, was slipping out of reach. "What happens if I walk away?" he asked. "You will be hunted," Orizia said. "Across cities, across borders, until someone succeeds." Evan closed his eyes for a moment. The truth settled slowly, heavily, without drama. There was no going back, no reclaiming the quiet life he had built. When he opened his eyes again, Orizia was watching him, not with pity, but with the same calm she carried into every danger. "We deal with this together," she said. Evan nodded once. The simple motion felt like a door closing behind him. The Echelon complex sat 30 miles outside the city. A block of reinforced concrete and mirrored glass rising from the dry hills like a command bunker that had decided to dress itself as a corporate building. Inside, rows of analysts worked under soft white lights, each station lined with screens showing satellite feeds, encrypted data streams, and sensor grids pulled from networks most governments did not even know existed. On the top floor, Director Mason Hale studied a live telemetry map projected across his desk. Thin threads of blue marked domestic communication lines. Red arcs marked military channels. And at the center, an irregular flicker pulsed in shifting shades of silver. The flicker did not belong to Earth. "Is that signal confirmed?" Hale asked without looking away. A technician moved closer. "Yes, sir. First detected by orbital relay 46 minutes ago. Frequency architecture does not match any known terrestrial source. Origin? Public district, Harbor Point, a small diner, according to ground-level mapping." Hale raised an eyebrow. "The same area where we picked up an anomalous radio spike earlier?" "Yes, sir." "And local law enforcement?" "No reports submitted." Hale leaned back in his chair. The man was in his 50s. Calm, composed, and built like someone who preferred the weight room over the golf course. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his jaw, thinking, "Show me the spectral breakdown again." The projection shifted. The silver pulse separated into layers, each marked with a code. Hale's eyes narrowed. 9-point alignment. That looks close to Lyrian architecture. "We believe so." The technician spoke carefully. "We cannot confirm without physical access. But the pattern is consistent with a guided sync encryption core." Hale let out a slow breath. If that was true, then something extremely valuable had just landed on Earth. And extremely dangerous. "Prepare a containment brief," Hale said. "Mark it level 7. The room went still. Level 7 was reserved for national security incidents the public would never hear about. Another analyst approached. "Sir, we also intercepted a secondary network burst. Looks like a trade bulletin from an off-world source." "Meaning?" "Someone not from Earth is placing a bounty." "On what?" "A human male, combat-trained, connected to the earlier incident." Hale's gaze sharpened. "So whoever came here brought trouble with them." He stood, walked to the window, and looked down over the hills. The world outside looked peaceful, quiet, almost harmless. But Hale knew better. He had spent 2 decades studying what would happen the moment Earth touched alien technology too early. Civilizations did not collapse from invasion. They collapsed from the race to control what they didn't understand. He turned back to the analysts. "Deploy a retrieval team," Hale ordered. "No wide operation, no public footprint, quiet assets only." A pause. "And be clear, we are not hunting the alien. We want whatever they brought. The tech comes first." "Yes, sir." The technicians dispersed, launching into motion. Hale remained at the window, hands folded behind his back. In the distance, clouds drifted over the faint line of the city. Somewhere out there, an off-world operative was hiding a stolen Lyrian core. And now, a civilian cook was entangled with her. Hale exhaled once. "Find them before anyone else does." Down in the motor bay, the first unmarked black transport began to roll out. Echelon Group had entered the hunt. The back alley was quiet except for the steady hum of distant traffic. Street lights cast thin pools of yellow onto the pavement. and the night breeze carried the faint smell of salt drifting up from the harbor. Evan stood beside a stack of crates behind the restaurant, trying to process the weight of everything he had just learned. Orizia closed the metal door behind them and locked it from the inside. Her shoulders remained tense, eyes scanning the alley with the caution of someone who never truly relaxed. She held her wrist module low, keeping its screen dim to avoid drawing attention. "We cannot stay here," she said. "More will come. Mercenaries from Kravosk's network, and Echelon's retrieval team is already mobilizing." Evan crossed his arms, leaning back against the crates. "Then start explaining. All of it." Orizia hesitated only a second. Then she powered up the module fully. A schematic rotated in midair, a wireframe sphere with layered rings and a dense core at its center. "This is the Helion core," she said, "a navigation architecture stolen from a Lyrian consortium. It does not fire beams. It does not explode. It synchronizes fleets across long distances, bypassing traditional communication delay." Evan studied the image. "So it's military tech." "Worse," she said, "it is strategic command tech. Whoever controls it can coordinate forces faster than any rival. Entire wars can shift with a device small enough to hide in a bag." Evan exhaled slowly. "And you're here to retrieve it?" "Yes," quietly. "Earth is not ready for open contact. The political consequences alone would reshape half the known map. And Kravosk wants to sell it." Orizia nodded. "For the right buyer, this core is worth a continent." Evan rubbed the back of his neck. "An Echelon group? They want to claim it for themselves," she said. "If they succeed, Earth will industrialize alien warfare a century before it should. The balance of power will collapse. Other civilizations will intervene. And that means a war your people can't step in to stop." Orizia looked up at him. Her expression was clear, honest, without dramatic flourish. "If Earth militarizes alien technology too early, it will not survive the century that follows." Evan went silent. The alley felt colder. "So," he said softly, "your problem just became my problem." Orizia lowered her module. "I did not intend for you to be involved. But you saved my life. And now you are marked. If we separate, you will not last long." Evan looked at the back door of his restaurant, the scratched paint, the old hinges, the comfort of routine behind it, the life he had fought to rebuild, the life he thought he had earned. He whispered to himself, "I just wanted a quiet kitchen." Orizia stepped closer. "I know." He looked at her, not as an alien officer, not as someone from a world he would never see, but as a person standing alone in a place that wasn't hers, carrying a burden no one else understood. "Tell me what you need," Evan said. "Distance," she answered. "Movement. A place where neither Kravosk nor Echelon can predict our path." He nodded once. Then he turned to lock the metal door of the restaurant from the outside. The click echoed faintly through the alley, a small, final sound, like closing a chapter he would never reopen. "Lead the way," Evan said. Orizia pulled her hood up. "Stay close." They slipped into the night, leaving the last light of the diner behind them. The warehouse looked abandoned even from across the street. Corrugated metal walls stretched along the empty lot, patched with rust and moonlight. Orizia checked the alley twice before leading Evan toward a side door that hung crooked on its hinges. She pushed it open just enough for them to slip in. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of dust and brake fluid. Stacks of unused crates formed narrow aisles between the walls. A single emergency light glowed above the far corner, flickering every few seconds as if struggling to stay alive. "This will work for a few hours," Orizia said quietly. Evan nodded, lowering his backpack to the floor. His hands felt heavier tonight, as if the weight of the last 24 hours had settled into his bones. He scanned the shadows, making sure nothing moved, then exhaled. Orizia walked deeper into the warehouse and set her wrist module on a crate. Its faint glow lit her face from below. She adjusted the settings carefully, reducing its output to a minimal pulse. "Low enough that Kravosk's trackers will have trouble isolating us," she said, "but not off. I still need access to basic readings." Evan sat on another crate and rubbed the side of his neck. "Do you ever rest?" "Only when it is safe." "So basically never." Her lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to a smile he had seen from her. but it faded as quickly as it appeared. Evan reached into his pack. "I brought a few things from the diner. They might help." He placed a small camping stove on the floor, added a can of heat gel, and set up a pan. The scent of burnt metal and faint propane filled the air as the flame rose. Orizia turned toward him. "You are cooking, now? You haven't eaten since before the fight," he said, "and you looked like you needed something that wasn't stress." She hesitated, then moved closer. The warmth from the small flame softened the cold in the warehouse. Evan cracked 2 eggs into the pan and mixed them with chopped vegetables he had stuffed into a container earlier. The sound of sizzling filled the empty space. Gentle and steady, it felt out of place in a room built for machines, but somehow right for the moment. Orizia watched the pan with quiet curiosity. "What is this called?" she asked. "An omelet," Evan said. "It's simple, but it works. It smells warm. That's kind of the point." He cooked in silence for a minute before asking, "What do people on your world eat?" "Efficiency rations," she said. "Balanced nutrition, optimized for performance." "That sounds miserable." "It is effective." "Effective isn't the same as living." Orizia looked at him then. Really looked. The flame reflected in her eyes, turning them softer than he had seen before. When he handed her the plate, she held it as if unsure how to start. She took a small bite, then another. Her shoulders eased, and for a moment, the tension wrapped around her seemed to loosen. "This," she said slowly, "feels like something a family would share." Evan swallowed the sudden tightness in his throat. "Maybe." She ate in silence, each bite slower than the last, as if trying to memorize the taste. After finishing, she set the plate aside and picked up her wrist module. "Your turn," she said. "You need to know how to operate a pulse scanner." "Why? I'm not joining your agency." "Because if we are separated, you must detect aerial sweeps and ground signatures. Otherwise you will be found in minutes." She expanded a small hologram, a grid of shifting lines and colored blips. Evan leaned closer. She guided his hand to the controls. "That line is atmospheric scatter," she said. "Ignore it. This one is terrestrial motion. And this is a sweep signature from a drone." Evan frowned. "Drone? As in, right now?" "No. Old data." She paused. "But the fact you asked means you are learning." He smirked. "Fear is a good teacher." She didn't laugh, but her gaze softened again. A low hum drifted through the warehouse. Orizia froze. Evan did too. "It is nothing," she said after a moment. "Just power lines outside." But the way her hand hovered near the module told him the truth. Someone out there was searching. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not this street. But they were getting closer. And the warehouse, with all its shadows and quiet, suddenly felt smaller. The hum outside faded, leaving only the soft crackle of cooling metal inside the warehouse. Evan stayed near the crates, watching the shadows settle back into place. But Orizia continued scanning her module as if trying to read danger between the dust particles. "You heard it too," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered, "but it was distant. We still have time." Her voice was steady, controlled, the same tone she used every time she chose duty over fear. Evan respected it, but he also hated it a little. It reminded him of every officer he had followed into missions no one came back from. He sat on a crate and clasped his hands together. "Orizia," he said, "we need to talk about what happens next." She lowered the module a fraction. "We find Kravosk, we recover the core, we leave Earth intact, that is what happens." "That's your mission," Evan said. "I'm asking about us." A flicker passed through her expression. But she didn't step away. "You want clarity. I understand." She folded the module and set it on the crate. "Say what you want to say." Evan drew a slow breath. "Back there, in the diner, I fought because I had no choice. I'm not proud of it. But I did it. But I am not going back to killing people as part of a plan. I left the military for a reason." Orizia crossed her arms. "If we confront Kravosk, force may be required." "That's exactly the problem," he said. "I don't want to decide who lives or dies. Not again." "That is a luxury," she replied. "I cannot afford it." Evan looked up, meeting her eyes. "And if your mission demands killing me one day? Is that just part of the job too?" Her jaw tensed, but she didn't look away. "You misunderstand," she said. "My duty is to prevent a conflict that could end entire populations. If I fail, millions die, maybe billions, depending on who gets access to the core. My decisions are not personal." "That's the problem," Evan said, his voice low. "They should be." Orizia turned away, pacing a few steps into the cold light. "On my world," she said, "we are taught early that personal feelings compromise judgment. Attachment clouds the ability to do what must be done." Evan leaned forward. "Do you believe that?" She didn't answer. He stood. "Orizia, I have seen plenty of missions where doing what must be done was just an excuse to ignore the cost. I know what it looks like when people justify anything because they believe they're saving the world." "And what would you have me do?" she asked sharply. "Let Kravosk sell the core? Allow Echelon to militarize it? Hope for peace while the galaxy prepares for war? I want you to stop acting like you had to carry everything alone." Silence filled the warehouse. For the first time since he met her, Orizia looked uncertain, not in her mission, but in herself. "You think I do not feel the weight?" she asked quietly. "You think I do not question the decisions I make? Every action is a calculation. Every compromise becomes another scar. I do not have the freedom to choose comfort over necessity." Evan stepped closer but kept his hands at his sides. "I'm not asking for comfort. I'm asking you to consider that killing isn't the only solution. And I am asking you to understand that sometimes it is," she said, her voice tightening. "Not because I want it. Because it is the only way to stop something far worse." He looked at her, really looked, and saw beneath the discipline a fatigue she never allowed herself to show. "I'm not abandoning you," he said softly, "but I won't become a weapon again." Orizia's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him as if weighing the meaning behind his words, searching for an angle that might let both realities coexist. There wasn't one. Not yet. A long, heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant hum outside and the faint ticking of the camping stove cooling on the floor. Orizia finally turned away. "We should rest," she said. "We move before sunrise." Evan didn't argue. The truth hung in the air between them, two people on the same side, but standing on different edges of what they believed was right. They were allies, but far from agreement. The warehouse grew colder as the night settled. Shadows eased over the crates, filling the empty space with a stillness neither of them tried to break. Evan sat on the edge of a pallet, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the faint glow from Orizia's wrist module across the room. She stood alone near the far wall, adjusting the settings with sharp, controlled gestures, but something in the way she moved felt off. Too rigid, too focused, like she was fighting not the module, but her own breath. "You know," Evan said softly, "you don't have to pretend nothing's wrong." Orizia didn't turn. "I am not pretending." "Yes," he answered, "you are." Silence again, but this time it felt brittle. She lowered her arm, letting the module dim. Her shoulders rose with one slow breath, then dropped. "When I was younger," she said, "the academy taught us that fear is a signal to be managed. Not ignored, not embraced, managed, controlled." Evan listened, letting her choose her pace. "But there are things," she continued, "that no training prepares you for." She walked closer, stopping a few paces in front of him. Her hands were clasped behind her back, posture straight, but her eyes looked somewhere far beyond the warehouse walls. "3 years ago," she said, "I was part of an extraction team on the outer colonization ring of Tarsa 4. The mission was simple: retrieve a missing anthropologist and evacuate before the region destabilized." Evan said nothing. "We found him alive," she said quietly, "but the instability worsened. Quakes, atmospheric collapse, ground fissures. We sent the distress pulse for pickup." Her throat tightened. Command responded with a correction. Evan frowned gently. "A correction?" "They said the extraction window had closed. Our survival risk was too high. Evacuation denied." Evan's breath stopped for a moment. "They left you there?" "Yes." A long silence stretched between them. Orizia wasn't looking at him now, she was looking at the floor, as if the concrete itself held the memory. "The anthropologist panicked," she said. "I had to calm him while the surface cracked around us. I promised I would get him out. I promised with everything I had. Her voice trembled, barely noticeable but real. "I carried him for nearly 2 hours. I thought we would die there." "But you didn't," Evan said softly. "No," she said. "Another patrol disregarded orders and found us. They risked disciplinary action to pull us from the collapse. The man survived. I survived. Command pretended it had always been part of the plan." Evan stood slowly and stepped closer. "Since that day," she continued, "I have followed my mission without question. Because I learned the truth. If I fail, no one will come. If I hesitate, someone else pays the price. And if I die, they will replace me before the world even knows my name." Evan let the words settle. They carried a quiet pain heavier than any wound. "Arizia," he said, "look at me." She lifted her gaze. There was steel in it. But beneath that, something cracked and fragile. "You are not alone here," he said, "not with me." She shook her head faintly. "You do not understand. I cannot afford attachments. They compromise judgment." "Judgment," he said, stepping closer, "is stronger when someone finally understands what you carry." Her breath caught. "Evan?" He raised a hand slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose to. She didn't. He placed his hand on her shoulder, light, steady, warm against the cold air. "You are not a unit," he said quietly. "You are someone I want to keep alive." Her eyes softened in a way he had never seen. The words seemed to break something inside her, not a weakness, but a wall she had held for too long. She closed her eyes for a moment, just breathing, letting the warmth of his hand settle the tremor in her chest. When she opened them again, she whispered, "That is dangerous." "For who?" Evan asked gently. "You, or me?" "Both. But it's real." She didn't argue. Outside, the hum returned, distant, low, nothing urgent yet, but neither of them moved toward weapons or scanning devices. For the first time since they met, the noise felt secondary. Arizia stepped closer, just enough that their shoulders almost touched. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. They stood together, in the cold warehouse, in the thin light, two lives from two worlds leaning a little closer for the first time. And somewhere in that fragile quiet, something new began. Rain drifted across the broken roof as the night settled in. Evan and Arizia stayed close to the far wall of the warehouse, still breathing unevenly after the truth they had just shared. The space was quiet for a moment, quiet enough for Evan to hear the faint hum of the city beyond the cracked windows. Then a pulse rolled through the air. It was soft, almost gentle, but every metal hinge in the room shivered. Arizia lifted her head. Her pupils narrowed at once. "That was not thunder," she said, her voice turned sharp. Evan felt it too, a vibration running through the floor, steady and patterned, like a coded sweep. He stepped toward the door. "What is it?" "A directional scan. Someone locked onto the spike when I powered the relay earlier." She pulled the device from her belt. A thin line of blue light ran across its face, blinking faster and faster. "They're triangulating the signature now." Outside, an engine roared. Another followed. Tires cut across wet pavement. Doors slammed. Evan's hands clenched on instinct. "How many?" he asked. Arizia listened for half a second. 10, maybe more. Heavy armor. Evan felt the same cold pressure slide down his back that he remembered from a battlefield long ago. He looked at her. "We move. Now." But the warehouse shook before they could make it to the rear exit. A metal cutter screamed from the outside, sparks spraying through the cracks of the doorframe. Voices shouted orders. Boots rushed to position. Arizia grabbed his sleeve. "They want the tech in my pack. They don't care about anything else." Evan pulled her behind the old conveyor belt. "They care about us now." The front door blew inward with a short blast. Splinters and dust filled the air. Shadows pushed through the smoke, black armor, sealed helmets, shoulder lamps slicing the dark into sharp, white beams. Evan kept his voice low. "Stay behind me. If they flank, you take the right gap and run." Arizia shook her head. "No, we move together." The soldiers spread out, forming a sweep line. Their rifles emitted a soft whine as capacitors charged, echelon tech, compact and brutal. One beam cut through a metal drum beside Evan, turning it red-hot in a breath. Evan tugged Arizia down. "That thing will punch through the whole wall. We can't stay here." The second blast hit the conveyor. shaking the floor. Bolts clattered across the concrete. A soldier shouted, "Target is inside. Keep pressure forward." Evan scanned the room. One exit left. A narrow service hatch near the shadows of the west wall. No door. Just a gap above old crates. He grabbed her wrist. "There. Move when I say." Another shot cracked overhead. Evan counted the steps of the soldiers. The rhythm of their advance. It felt like slipping back into a version of himself he wanted gone. But he breathed once, steady, and motioned Arisia forward. "Go." They sprinted across the floor. A beam cut past them, melting the railing. Evan pushed Arisia upward first. She pulled herself through the hatch with a strained breath. Evan followed, boots scraping the metal edge. A gloved hand reached after his leg, but he kicked back hard and pulled himself through as a burst of light scorched the wall below. They dropped into a narrow alley behind the warehouse. Cold air hit their faces. The rain fell harder now, blurring the streetlights into white streaks. Evan looked toward the main road. More engines, more lights. They were closing in from both sides. Arisia wiped water from her face. "They brought an entire team for one signal." "They brought a team," Evan said, "because you're not the only target anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sirens in the distance echoed off the buildings, bouncing through the narrow streets like a warning. Arisia tightened her grip on the pack. "Then we run until we find someone who will listen." Evan nodded. "And we stay alive long enough to make it matter." Rain hammered the pavement as they slipped deeper into the dark. The sound of engines chasing them through the city's veins. As if the whole world had just woken up to hunt. The rain did not stop when they reached the edge of the industrial district. It fell in long silver lines across the abandoned loading yards, mixing with the dust and the heat coming off Evan's jacket. Both of them were breathing hard, lungs still tight from the sprint through the ruins. But the gunfire behind them had faded. For the moment, the city had gone quiet again. Arisia kept her back to the wall of an old freight terminal, tightening the band of her portable scanner. The device hummed faintly as it powered up, its surface glowing with a soft pulse that cut through the dark. Evan watched her steady her hands. "You sure you lost their signal?" he asked. "I did," she said. "Echelon's relay nodes are slow in areas like this. That gives us a few minutes. I need them." She slid one fingertip across the scanner's display, opening a compressed packet of data she had captured earlier. Bursts of coded pulses that had surged across the grid when Kravosk tried to mask his location. Arisia decrypted the bursts in silence. Evan saw the reflection of streaming characters across her eyes. "Is that what I think it is?" he asked. "It is the signature of the stolen core," she said. "The pattern matches devices made only for military data transit. He activated it within the last hour." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the empty yards. Time passed slowly for a moment as the scanner refined the signals. Arisia knelt and set the device on the concrete. A thin beam rose from the top, drawing a map of energy points in the air, a three-dimensional layout of the district. Evan leaned in, following the shifting lights. "What am I looking at?" "Nodes," she said, "small ones." He placed them to test the link stability. They form a path toward the main anchor. If he finishes aligning the channel, he can transmit the core's data onto the black network. "What happens if he succeeds?" Evan asked. "Every system broker across the dark channels will know Earth is an unprotected point." Arisia said, "Your planet becomes a market. Or a battleground." Another pulse fired across the scanner. A brighter point appeared near the far edge of the projected map. Arisia's eyes narrowed. "That's the anchor location. The primary relay. He is preparing to open a long-range bridge." Evan recognized the area. "That spot is inside the old East Pier power depot," he said. "No one goes there anymore. Internal collapses, unsafe wiring, forgotten inspections. Perfect place to hide." Exactly why he picked it. The scanner beeped. A line of text scrolled across the top. Estimated activation window: 4 hours. 12 minutes. Evan felt a weight settle in his chest. "He's that close?" "Yes," she said. "Once the bridge stabilizes, the data is gone, and the deal is live." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain kept falling, thin and cold. Evan looked toward the direction of the depot. So that's where we go next. Orizia picked up the scanner, folded its panels, and slipped it into her coat. When we step in, there is no turning back, she said. That place will not be unguarded. And if he brought the rest of the core modules, the risk will rise fast. Evan tightened the strap on his pack. We've been running since the first night. I'm tired of running. She met his eyes. Something shifted between them, shared resolve shaped by danger. He nodded at the dark skyline. Lead the way. Orizia started walking. He followed. Lights from the dead factories flickered weakly as they moved deeper into the zone. Behind them, the scanner emitted one last soft pulse before going silent, its final confirmation that the trail they were following was real. And ahead, hidden beyond the rows of rusted steel, waited the place where Kravosk planned to sell a future none of them would survive. They moved through the rain-dark alleys toward the East Pier line. Keeping to the shadows, the industrial district had grown quieter, but not in a comforting way. It was the kind of silence Evan recognized from deployments overseas, a silence created by surveillance more than the absence of people. Orizia stopped suddenly. She raised her hand, signaling Evan to freeze. A faint pulse flickered across the scanner on her wrist, different from Kravosk's signal. Clean, patterned, originating from above. Don't move, she whispered. Evan pressed his back against the concrete wall. He knew that kind of pulse. Encrypted, low frequency, directional, military grade. A drone slipped out from behind the upper levels of the freight terminal, sleek. Silent, with a tri-lens sensor array scanning the ground. Its flight path wasn't random. It was doing a search grid. Evan muttered, "Echelon." Orizia's expression hardened. "They're earlier than I expected." The drone hovered for a few seconds, then glided away, the hum fading into the night. For several seconds, time seemed to slow as neither of them moved or spoke. Orizia tapped her scanner again, bringing up another layer of data, this time. Network traffic pulled from atmospheric channels. Evan saw English words among the coded bursts. Restrict external contact. Observe alien activity. Contain without disclosure. He felt his stomach tighten. This isn't about catching Kravosk anymore. They're watching you. And you, Orizia said calmly. They can't let me leave your planet with proof of alien interference. At the same time, they can't arrest me without revealing my presence. So they hold you in place. Evan said, a box with no walls. A gray zone, she confirmed. They want control without exposure. If they capture Kravosk, they can force him to hand over the core. If they capture me, they gain leverage over the Interstellar Security Bureau. And if they capture you, they erase the witness. Lights suddenly flashed along the roofs 3 blocks away, sharp, white, synchronized. Evan recognized the pattern at once. Tactical positioning beacons. Not police. Not mercenaries. That's a containment sweep, he said. Orizia nodded. They're trying to seal the district. Evan clenched his jaw. This is exactly what they did overseas, he said. Quiet perimeter setting, no comms, no uniform markings. By the time anyone realizes, the operation is already over. They're preparing for a retrieval. Of me, Orizia said softly. And of the core, Evan added. The rain grew heavier, drumming against metal sheets. Evan watched the 3 flashing points triangulate across the skyline, drawing an invisible cage. We can't let them pin us down, he said. No, Orizia replied. If we let Echelon Group take control, the future of your planet shifts overnight. Evan tightened the grip on his pack. So they're not just another enemy. They're a force with ambition, Orizia said. And ambition is more dangerous than weapons. The lights shifted again, narrowing the perimeter. Evan looked at her. We move now. And we move quietly, she said. They slipped back into the shadows, racing against the tightening net as the night around them grew sharp with unseen eyes. They ran until the containment lights faded behind them. Only when they reached a row of derelict storage units did Evan finally slow down. The metal doors were rusted shut. The walls covered in old paint and salt from the sea winds. It wasn't safety, but it was shelter. Orizia scanned the area once more, checking for drones. All clear, she said, for now. Evan paced in the narrow space between the units. His breath still rough from the sprint. His mind was already turning, not toward escape, but toward the problem they could no longer outrun. If Kravosk finishes that relay, he said, this doesn't just stay on Earth. The whole network gets a map to your core tech. Orizia nodded. An echelon group will intercept the transmission to seize it. So both sides win, Evan said, and everyone else loses. He stopped pacing. We can't let him finish. We have to hit the depot before he activates the bridge. Orizia stepped closer. You have an idea, she said. Evan slipped the pack off his shoulder and knelt, pulling items out. Metal clips. 2 folded kitchen wire racks. Duct tape. A pouch of screws. A small pry bar. A coil of insulated cable. And a spherical sensor Orizia had given him earlier. Orizia raised an eyebrow. You brought all of that? I grabbed whatever I could before we ran. He examined the cable. Most people think traps need explosives. They don't. They just need pressure, timing, and a place people don't pay attention to. He positioned the wire racks side by side on the ground. These can hold weight like a flexible bridge. If someone steps in the wrong spot, the balance shifts fast. Good for redirecting movement. You're planning choke points, Orizia said quietly. Exactly. Kravosk's men will expect a direct confrontation. We give them misdirection. Make them think we're cornered while we're actually pushing them where we want. Orizia crouched beside him and placed her sensor next to the coil of cable. This device can overlay thermal signatures through walls. It will help us track guard rotations. And that, Evan said, is how we stay ahead. For a moment, neither spoke. They just worked, assembling pieces. Testing tension. Marking angles. It was the kind of coordination that didn't need discussion. Evan handled the practical physics. Orizia handled data projections and surveillance. The rain outside softened, tapping lightly against the metal roofs. Time moved slower for a few breaths, the quiet giving them room to think. Orizia adjusted her wrist module, projecting a small layout of the East Pier power depot. There are 3 entrances, she said. South door collapsed. North door welded shut. The main gate is guarded. But the interior scaffolding is unstable. That will be your advantage. Then we go in through the west maintenance path. Evan said. It's narrow. Perfect for funneling them. Orizia looked at him for a long moment. You've done this before. More times than I want to remember. He said softly. But this time, it's different. This time I'm doing it for something that matters. She held his gaze. Not as a soldier. Not as an alien agent. As someone who trusted him. Evan packed the last tools into the bag and zipped it shut. So, he said, are you ready? Orizia slipped the sensor into her coat and stood. Yes, and this time, we choose the ground. Together, they stepped out of the storage unit, moving with quiet purpose toward the depot where 2 worlds were about to collide. The power depot rose out of the fog like a dead skeleton of steel. Broken support beams leaned at sharp angles, and old transformers sat half-buried in rubble. The air smelled of rust and damp concrete, an abandoned world inside a living city. Evan and Orizia approached from the west maintenance passage, keeping low. The only light came from a cracked rooftop panel flickering weakly above the main gate. Orizia scanned the entrance. 3 guards, she whispered. Thermal signatures show more inside. Evan nodded. Good, if they're clustered, the scaffolding trick will work. They slipped down a narrow gap between 2 collapsed walls. Evan stretched a cable across a slanted beam and tied it into the frame of the scaffold above. Orizia placed the sensor underneath, its indicator pulsing with a steady glow. When someone steps on the center plate, Evan whispered, the tension shifts. The walkway drops, not enough to kill, enough to force them to reposition. And that will open a path, Orizia said. They moved deeper. Inside, the depot felt colder. Dust floated in the light of their small handheld lamp, and pipes ran like ribs overhead. Evan recognized the sounds in the distance, boots on metal, the low hum of equipment warming up. They reached a balcony overlooking the central chamber. And stopped. Dozens of crates were stacked in neat rows. Screens glowed with real-time diagnostics. Lines of power conduits ran into a large cylindrical anchor set in the floor. its surface marked by alien geometry. Kravosk stood near the anchor's control console. But he wasn't alone. Several men in matte black tactical armor stood with him, gear identical to the kind Evan had seen earlier. Arizia's voice dropped to a breath. Echelon. Evan felt his stomach tighten. He leaned forward, watching the interaction below. One of the Echelon operatives handed Kravosk a tablet. Kravosk inserted a data spike into it, transferring something. Arizia zoomed the sensor's lens. Symbols formed on the display. It's the core's prototype map, she whispered. He's giving them partial access. Evan's jaw hardened. So they're not hunting him. They're buying from him. And once the deal finishes, Arizia said, Echelon will black out every witness. Including him. Including us. Including anyone who knows this anchor exists. Minutes ticked away as they watched the guards reposition and check gear. Time slowed just long enough for dread to settle before reality pressed forward again. Arizia touched Evan's arm. If they get that data, your planet becomes a test ground. They'll reverse engineer weapons they don't understand. And the first system to answer will not negotiate. Evan stared down at the scene. At the men who should have protected their own world but were now making bargains in the dark. I fought in places like this, he said quietly. And every time it started with greed dressed up as strategy. He exhaled, steady and cold. So we stop them here. Arizia met his eyes. We will. Two guards stepped onto the scaffold walkway near the far wall. The metal creaked. Evan gave Arizia a small nod. She flicked her wrist module, activating the sensor. The walkway dropped 3 inches. The guards stumbled, cursing as equipment clattered. Shouts erupted across the chamber. Weapons raised. Lights flared. Evan tightened the strap on his pack. That's our opening, he whispered. They slipped down the staircase into the smoke-lit chamber below, moving straight toward the place where 2 factions were preparing to decide the fate of an entire planet. And the moment they stepped off the final stair, the night shifted from pursuit to war. The scaffolding rattled again as the guards scrambled for balance. Shouts rose across the chamber. Sharp and chaotic. Evan felt the tension in the metal under his boots. The vibration of men repositioning in confusion. It was the moment he'd been waiting for. Move, he whispered. He and Arizia slipped down the final stairwell, staying in the shadow of a rusted support beam. Weapons fire erupted on the far side of the room as Kravosk's mercenaries reacted first, sweeping the upper levels with rapid bursts. Their shots sparked against the steel rafters, sending orange flashes across the dark. Then another sound cut through the noise, deeper, heavier. Evan recognized it instantly. Echelon group had arrived. A reinforced side door blew inward, throwing dust and metal shards across the floor. A squad in matte black armor surged into the chamber with practiced precision. Their rifles emitted a dull electric discharge as they fired, each shot leaving a thin trail of ionized air. Arizia ducked behind a column, pulling Evan with her. They're trying to take the anchor intact, she said. He nodded. That's why we push them into each other. A mercenary spotted movement near their cover and opened fire. Evan grabbed Arizia's arm and pulled her deeper behind the column as the rounds chewed into the concrete. Keep low, he whispered. We need them to trip the next trap. Arizia tapped her wrist module, sending a quick pulse to the sensor they had planted on the walkway. A second later, the tension cable tightened. A section of the metal grate snapped upward, slamming into a guard's legs. He toppled sideways into another mercenary, both crashing to the floor. The noise drew the attention of Echelon's forward line. They shifted their aim, and the room erupted into full crossfire. Kravosk shouted orders from the far end, his voice carrying through the smoke. Hold the center, keep them away from the anchor. But Echelon wasn't listening. They moved in wedge formation toward the cylindrical device in the floor, firing at anyone who wasn't wearing their armor. Evan used the moment to sprint across a lower platform, sliding behind a generator shell as bullets zipped past. Arizia followed him, staying tight on his shoulder. Two flanking on the left, she warned. I see them. Evan grabbed a loose pipe and jammed it under the edge of a heavy storage crate. With one quick shove, he tipped it down the ramp. The crate thundered across the floor and crashed into the flanking pair, knocking them apart. Orizia took the opening, dropping one with a clean shot to the chest plate. Evan finished the second with a strike from the pry bar, knocking the rifle out of his hands. More gunfire cracked overhead. Sparks rained down as a stray round hit an exposed control panel, sending blue arcs of electricity snapping across the wall. Amid the chaos, Kravosk bolted from the console. He sprinted toward the inner corridor leading to the anchor core. Orizia saw him and pointed. "He's running." "Let him," Evan said. "We need to thin the rest first." But Echelon had other plans. Their commander barked an order, and 2 soldiers broke formation, pursuing Kravosk directly. The rest laid down suppressing fire toward the mercenaries. Evan fired back, forcing them to take cover behind the crates. He could feel the heat building in the air, the mix of gunpowder, old electrical systems, and fear. Time stretched strangely for a moment as the firing paused. A short silence fell across the chamber, filled only by the soft hum of the anchor warming. Then everything erupted again. An Echelon rifleman vaulted over a pipe and charged directly at Evan. Evan sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and drove a knee into his ribs. The man staggered, but before he hit the ground, Orizia delivered a precise strike to disable him fully. "They're pushing toward the core," she said. "That's exactly why we have to get ahead of them." Across the room, Kravosk reached the corridor entrance. He glanced back once, eyes narrowed, then disappeared into the dark. Evan tightened the grip on his weapon. "Orizia, we go after him." She reloaded her sidearm with a clean, fluid motion. "Right behind you." They dashed across the chamber, weaving through debris and wounded mercenaries as the three-way battle raged on behind them. Every step brought them closer to the final confrontation, the place where Kravosk intended to decide the fate of an entire planet. And as they slipped into the narrow corridor, the sounds of the battle echoed after them like the fading heartbeat of a war that was only beginning. The corridor swallowed them in darkness. Only the low red glow of emergency strips lit the narrow walls, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Evan kept his steps quiet, scanning every doorway and pipe junction. Ahead, faint metal clatter echoed. Kravosk was close. Orizia motioned for Evan to halt. She tightened her grip on her sidearm, leaned close, and spoke barely above a breath. "He knows this place. Let me take point." Evan nodded once. They advanced another 30 feet before the corridor opened into a wide maintenance chamber. Old conduits hung from the ceiling, and a generator hummed at the center, vibrating the floor. Kravosk stood on the far side, crouched behind a column of rusted piping. He was bigger than Evan remembered, broad shoulders wrapped in patched armor. One arm fitted with a reinforced gauntlet glowing with unstable blue light. He heard them enter. "So," he growled, "the ISB sends cooks and cast-offs to stop me now." Orizia stepped forward, lowering her weapon just an inch. "You're done, Kravosk. The core map is incomplete. They'll never trust you." "Oh, they will," he said. "Everyone trusts a man who brings them power." He lunged. Orizia rolled aside as the gauntlet slammed into the floor where she'd been standing. Concrete cracked, sparks scattered. The impact wasn't supernatural, just raw force amplified by an industrial exo-brace. Evan moved to flank, but Kravosk swung the gauntlet again, sweeping debris toward him. "Don't," Orizia shouted. "He wants you close." Evan ducked behind a fallen beam, letting Orizia draw the attention. She circled him carefully, staying just outside his reach. "Kravosk," she said, breath steady, "you stole tech you don't understand. You'll burn every system you touch. And you? You follow orders from people who never bleed." He snarled. He charged again. This time Orizia sidestepped with precision, grabbed the edge of his gauntlet, and used his momentum to pivot him into the generator casing. The metal rang with the impact. Kravosk roared and swung wildly. A few seconds passed in tense silence. The hum of the generator deepened, filling the room with vibration. Orizia used the moment to slow her breathing. Evan recognized it, the calm before she committed. Kravosk rushed forward, arm raised for a decisive blow. Orizia dropped low, slid under the strike, and fired one clean shot into the hydraulic joint of his gauntlet. The brace sputtered and locked. Kravosk stumbled, momentum pulling him off balance. Orizia surged upward, grabbed his collar, and slammed him into the floor. Before he could recover, she pressed her knee against his spine and snapped a restraint clamp around his wrists. Kravosk gasped, trying to twist free. "You think this ends with me in chains?" he spat. "Your planet is already on their maps. They're coming." Orizia tightened the second clamp. "Then we'll be ready." Kravosk stopped struggling. A grim smile crept across his face. "Your kind always thinks that." Evan stepped beside them, breath unsteady. "He's not lying, is he?" Orizia didn't answer immediately. She only looked at the dark corridor leading back into the main chamber, where the anchor still hummed. And where more danger waited. "We take him out," she said softly, "then we face whatever's next." She pulled Kravosk to his feet, bound and defeated. The generator's pulse echoed through the chamber as they prepared to bring him back, toward a decision that would change everything. They dragged Kravosk back through the corridor, his restraint clamps humming softly with each step. Evan kept a firm grip on his arm while Orizia stayed a pace ahead. Scanning for remaining hostiles, the sounds of the three-way firefight had faded behind them. Only scattered echoes remained, metal shifting, distant boots retreating, the dying pulse of a battle that had torn the depot apart. When they reached the loading yard behind the building, the sky above was a deep gray, lit only by the glow of distant street lamps. Orizia pressed 2 fingers against the thin device clipped to her collar. "This is Agent Vale," she said, "target secured, requesting immediate extraction." The device chirped once, sharp and precise. A faint distortion rippled across the air near the edge of the yard, like heat rising from pavement. The shimmer widened, revealing the outline of a compact ship, its hull dark and angular. No markings, no lights, designed for presence without acknowledgement. Evan took half a step back. "So this is ISB." Orizia didn't look at the ship. "It's a field carrier, minimal crew, only what's necessary." The side panel of the craft unfolded with a hydraulic hiss, and 2 ISB officers stepped out, helmets sealed. Movements efficient, they took Kravosk from Evan without a word, gripping him with practiced neutrality. Kravosk laughed under his breath. "You think you've won something tonight?" The officers pushed him up the ramp. Orizia exhaled slowly. "Evan, we need to talk." He knew that tone. He'd heard it on deployment before, when choices cut both ways. "You're leaving," he said. "My orders are clear," she replied. "I have to return with him for tribunal review. Everything he stole must be assessed." "And if I go with you?" Orizia's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "If you step on that ship, you won't be a citizen anymore. You'll be an unauthorized off-world entrant. Every system would tag you as a fugitive." Silence settled between them as the yard lights flickered in the damp air. A few seconds passed, heavy, slow. Evan looked at the open ramp. Then at her. "I don't want this to be where it ends." "It isn't," she said, "but if I stay, I betray my duty. And if you follow, you lose your home." He swallowed hard. "That's not a choice." "No," she whispered, "it's the only one we have." Orizia lifted a small object from her coat, a slim, silver module with a faint blue indicator. She placed it in his hand. "For when the time changes." She stepped back, forcing herself not to hesitate. The officers signaled her forward. Orizia held Evan's gaze one last time. No promises. No dramatic vows. Just the quiet truth of 2 people pulled apart by the weight of worlds. Then she turned and walked up the ramp. The panel closed behind her with a final metallic thud. Seconds later, the ship vanished into the night sky, leaving the yard empty except for Evan. Standing alone in the cold air, the silver module glowing softly in his palm. Evan stayed in the yard long after the ship vanished. The night felt heavier without the hum of its engines, as if the air itself had settled into a quiet he wasn't ready for. He looked down at the silver module Orizia had given him. It rested in his palm like something fragile, yet it carried a weight he couldn't measure. Eventually, he turned toward the city. The walk back to Harbor Point took nearly an hour. Streetlights flickered. A few delivery trucks passed. No one looked twice at him, another tired man returning from a long shift. He liked that anonymity more than he expected. When he reached the door of his restaurant, he hesitated. The place looked smaller somehow, like a memory he was stepping back into. Inside, the chairs were still overturned from the first attack. Plates lay smashed across the floor. A hanging lamp swung gently in the draft. Evan closed the door behind him and let the silence settle. 3 minutes passed before he moved. He started with the chairs, lifting each one, checking the legs, tightening loose bolts, then the tables, then the counters. The repetitive work steadied him. He swept the floor, replaced broken tiles, wiped dust from the stove hood. By the time he reached the last shattered plate, the sky outside had begun to pale. The city was waking up again, unaware of what had happened beneath its streets. Evan stood behind the counter and touched the ignition switch on the main burner. The flame rose with a soft, clear sound. It was the first warm light he had seen since she left. He set the silver module on the counter. Its indicator blinked twice, then paused. He frowned. "Arisia?" The module blinked again, this time with a sharper rhythm. A tiny projection rose from its surface, just a single line of encoded text. The translation layer he had learned to use displayed the message slowly. One word at a time. "When Earth opens its gates to the stars, I'll find you." The projection faded. The module dimmed back to a soft blue. Evan leaned on the counter, staring at the empty space where the words had been. He wasn't smiling, but the tightness in his chest had eased. He looked through the window at the early sky. A long trail of clouds stretched across the horizon, lit by the first hints of sunrise. For the first time in years, he let himself imagine a future that reached farther than the harbor. Not a fantasy, just a possibility. He switched on the second burner. The kitchen filled with quiet warmth. Somewhere far above the clouds, Arisia Vale was carrying a criminal toward judgment. And somewhere beyond that, a wider universe was turning, waiting for the day Earth would stop being alone. Evan stood in the soft glow of the kitchen lights, steady and still. Then he whispered into the empty morning air. "Whenever that day comes, I'll be here." And so, beneath the quiet glow of his small kitchen, Evan Carter stood alone, holding the faint echo of a message from a woman who had crossed the stars. The world outside kept turning, unaware of the war he'd helped prevent or the future now waiting just beyond Earth's horizon. He wasn't a soldier anymore. Not just a cook, either. He was something in between, a man who had seen the truth of the universe and still chose to hope. And somewhere far beyond the sky, Arisia Vale was alive, carrying her own part of that hope with her. Their paths would cross again. But until that day arrived, Evan kept the flame burning in the place he called home. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more sci-fi stories coming soon.